Before we get started, we'd like to acknowledge our sponsors. Thank you so much to JP Morgan Chase and UPS. We appreciate your continued support of ASED and your commitment to Hispanic inclusion. So let's get started. I'm excited to be here with you hosting this conversation featuring David, a very close personal friend and a huge partner of ASED. Welcome, David.
So good morning, Marianne.
All right, so I am going to hide my video because the floor is yours, sir.
So it's my pleasure to be here with all of you this morning. Certainly what I would like to do for our session of Unleash the Leader Within is take the first 10 to 15 minutes to maybe share a little bit of my story, make it a little bit more personal, right? I really wanted to stay away from presentations, but more make this a conversation, right? So I'd like to share a little bit about myself, right? I'll give you a little bit about my background, as well as obviously some of my education, family kind of scenarios. And then I'll really share with you kind of my journey, right? What I experienced during the course of my 38 years with UPS. And my intention and my hopes are not for me to go ahead and go back memory lane so much or to embellish, but the real intention here is maybe to share a couple of things that were key for myself that, you know, may be of value to you or may give you the opportunity to put another tool or toolbox in your toolbox of personal and professional growth, right? I'm sure my story is very similar to yours, and I think that's the power of us, right? That there's so much success that happens out there when we're willing to share it. I think one, it maybe lifts all of us up, but more importantly, maybe there's some lessons learned there. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Again, my name is David Ruiz. I'm married. I've been with my beautiful bride for 40 years. We're college sweethearts. We met in college, right? And then we have a daughter. I have a high school junior daughter. My parents are both from Mexico, the great state of Jalisco. And they migrated to the U.S. back in the 50s and ended up going to Chicago, very industrial town where they were looking for obviously work and opportunity. And then they ended up meeting, getting married, and had 4 children. So I am the oldest of 4. They did perfect family planning, boy, girl. And I'm 2 years older than my next sibling, and then they're all one year apart there. Something very important to my family when, as they started raising their family was education. So they made some very, very big efforts to go ahead and do everything they can to position us with a good education. So all of us attended private school, both grammar and high school, right? Specifically Catholic schools. And then we all, myself and my siblings, attended the University of Illinois at Chicago, where we're pretty proud to say that we all graduated there with various degrees there. So, in today's world, it may not be that, big of a one-off, but in those years, back in the 70s and the 80s, it was a pretty big deal for, a couple of folks from a different country to come here and all their kids to attend college there. One thing that while I was growing up in my community, it was very interesting for me because one, I was a recipient of being able to attend a community organization, which I think is extremely important, right? Being part of a community, but it was instrumental for me. It was a boys club, which is now a Boys and Girls Club, but they were instrumental in helping support what my parents were attempting to do was to go ahead and make sure that we got a good education and as well be involved in other, whether it was arts or sports. So it was definitely a great organization that helped hone our academic and athletic skills there. And being in the inner city of Chicago was much needed, right? Where for many of us, this location ended up becoming a safe haven. The other part about my background and growing up is it was a very diverse community. I really experienced and lived diversity before I guess the term diversity and inclusion became kind of a corporate tagline and a corporate initiative there. And that was very powerful for me because at an early age, I got to really learn, accept, understand, and experience diversity at its best. And you'll hear in my story later on how that helped me as I navigated corporate America there. So let's go ahead. That's a little bit about my personal background. Let's talk a little bit about life at UPS. So during my collegiate years, I ended up looking for a job to help supplement, paying for expenses and living expenses, right? And obviously educational expenses. So I ended up getting a job with this company called UPS, right? United Parcel Service. And I started as a part-time employee, basically did all the jobs that you can do there, right? Very labor intense, unloading, loading, sorting. I mean, you name it. I did every job. I worked every shift that I could. And really, it was what I call a stepping stone for me later on in life. My intent initially was just to get the job to really get through college and then move on. But once I graduated, I had gotten to know the company so well that I decided I wanted to stay there and try to, move up within the organization for a couple of reasons. I thought the company, one, created and afforded a lot of opportunity. It was a global company. There was a lot of promotion from within. And then obviously they paid pretty well. So I ended up becoming a driver, and I did that for about a year. And then built some strong relationships, specifically with my boss. So, relationships is key, right? I think you all know that. But it was very important for me. So my boss actually ended up getting promoted and went into the engineering function and was looking to build his team and asked me to come on. And I did. So I ended up becoming what at that time you would call an owner of the company. So it was a big step. You end up becoming a management employee, but at that time I also became a share owner, right, very early in my career. So again, I did all the jobs there, right, the various jobs in engineering, inside operations, outside operations, you name it. I took on every job that they asked me to do. Was then able to get promoted to manager, after about 4 years as a supervisor. And it was my first step moving outside of my comfort zone in terms of, one, I was asked to go to a different business unit, even though it was within Illinois. It didn't require relocation, but I did have to go to a whole business unit. So certainly learning a little bit of the dynamics of a new business unit was a learning step for me. And then same thing, did the job there as a manager for a handful of years, and then was presented an opportunity to become a director. And at that point is when I crossed what I call one of my bigger, decisions in life, and it was relocation. And some of you probably have relocated out there, so you know the challenges with it. But from my experience, right, being the oldest son, right, all my support, and all my friends and really my life was centered in Chicago there. So it's a big step. And then certainly the part of family, right, my wife and I, would then leave and move on. So she supported me. Long story short, we ended up moving out to Florida, Miami. So not a first bad place to go to. But spent about 4.5 years there, managing the engineering group for all of Mexico, Puerto Rico, Central South America there. So some tremendous learnings, right? Certainly seeing how to do business out of the country was a tremendous learning experience. I was then asked to just do another lateral assignment and come back into Wisconsin and just continue to shore up my skills. And then a couple years after that, I was then offered the opportunity to become the president and general manager of one of the countries I had helped set up when I was back in Miami, which was Mexico. And that was, a big start to my career, actually being not only a senior executive, but an officer of the company there. When I took the job, it was a tremendous, if you want to say, challenge. We were building our international operations and they weren't faring very well. As a matter of fact, they weren't, profitable. But pretty proud to say that once we put the team together there, we turned things around, and not only did we become a very solid team, but we became very profitable and contributed heavily to the organization. So that afforded me some additional opportunities, right? I was then asked to move on to South Carolina and really attack another challenge there. Smaller place, but big part of our operation where we have a regional air facility there. So I was asked to go there. We spent 2 hard years working there and turn that place around as well. And then I got my next big opportunity, which was to go out into international once again and help build our international operations. So now that required another relocation for myself and to relocate, obviously from the US now to Europe. So I moved to Brussels, Belgium. My responsibility there became to oversee and build 28 countries, right? So pretty daunting task, huge geography. I was based in Brussels, Belgium. So some of the countries I had were established countries that were what we called Western or Westernized countries, right? Such as Netherlands, France, Belgium, Spain. And then we had a handful of companies that had just become part of the European Union, such as Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Austria, Hungary. I was also responsible for all the Nordic countries. So, Denmark, Finland, Norway, Sweden, the Baltics, right? Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and then Russia and a whole bunch of countries that fell under kind of Russia's guise that end with the word stan, right? So Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and I'm sure there's quite a few that I didn't add in there. But needless to say, tremendous opportunity. Took us quite a few years, but we really built that business unit to where we became the most profitable, fastest growing unit. We had one of the most successful acquisitions, and acquisitions can be extremely tough. And we had one of the most successful ones in Poland, and ended up becoming the market leader in Poland in a very short time, in a couple of years. And it was only the second country outside of the United States that became the market leader. So some big accomplishments. Then moved on back to the United States, took on a brief assignment. And when I say brief, a couple of years in Wisconsin. Again, there were some challenges there with some service and leadership. And, it was ultimately, all the things were in place. They just needed to have the arrows pointing in the right direction. So we ended up doing a nice job there. And then my last assignment was where I currently live in Florida. And the organization was doing some transforming and restructuring. And what they were really trying to do was to obviously do more with less. So the state here used to be managed by 3 presidents. And they asked me to combine all of those and just have, 1 president here. So we did that. It's pretty substantial, right? As you all know, Florida is the 3rd largest state in the country. It's 20 million people. From a company perspective, 15,000 plus employees, billions of dollars in revenue and expense, millions of customers, et cetera there. So it was great to be able to have all of those opportunities there. So that's a little bit of, kind of in a nutshell, a little bit of my 38-year career trajectory. I just want to touch base before I turn it over to Mary Ann for some questions on a couple of things that I think were extremely important. One, you heard me talk about education. I think that's a no-brainer, but you also heard me talk about all the different jobs that I took on. So I think it's important, one, that if you're in your organization, you're looking to grow, that you learn about all the different areas of your company. And as well, take a look at your skill set and look outside of your core competencies and see how you can shore up, your skill sets, right? You heard me talk about putting more tools in your toolbox. Bottom line is that I encourage you all to be a life learner, right? As you grow to be a leader, you're going to be a teacher, but to be a good teacher, you need to be a good student, right? You heard me speak about my early years about diversity, right? And I think it was so important that as I grew up as a young man, I lived it, experienced it, and then later on in life, you heard all of my assignments, especially out in Europe with 28 countries. You can't get much more diverse than that. So again, appreciate the diversity, understand it, seek it, and then most important, be inclusive. And if you have the opportunity to go ahead and set, your leadership teams, or even to have some influence in your organization, the teams and the organization need to reflect the communities that we live and serve on. And without a shadow of doubt, they have to be diverse. You hear me talking about community, how important the Boys Club was for me. So I've been a lifelong supporter of communities and community agencies and organizations because I see the goodness they can do, and I'm living proof of that. You heard me talk about relocation, super important, tough to do. Many of you know that, you've done it already. It never gets any easier, but you got to make sure you're willing to do it. And sometimes you won't go to the places you want to go to. They're going to ask you to go where they need you. And then first and foremost, you need to make sure it's good with your family. If things aren't good at home, they won't be good at work. Obviously, as you go through your career, I think you know that you got to get results and you have to achieve, right? Getting results and achieving certainly gets attention, right? It opens doors for your opportunities, but it certainly gets people's attention when you can go in and be a troubleshooter or a fixer, right? How do you get construed? And in my case, every time I got a call from the CEO or the chief operating officer, they say, we have an assignment for you. And then it was followed by, you're going into a hornet's nest.
David, that's perfect timing, dear. I am getting swamped with questions.
Okay. Well, that's a good thing.
So, yes. So
one last thing, Marianne, that I'll do is, and I just tell people, please ensure that you work on your legacy. Your legacy is your story. It's what you do throughout, the course of your career and your life there. And it's pretty simple. What will people say when your name is mentioned, right? And what you hope that they say is some very good and humbling things, and not say things like great leader, but he was a bleep, bleep, bleep type of thing, right? So take assessment of where you are within your growth there, and then make the adjustments. Okay, Marianne, thanks. I'm ready for any comments.
Before I jump into the questions, because we really do have a lot of good questions, I'm going to jump just a little bit ahead here and share with everyone. In the case that we can't get to all of your questions, David has also agreed to stop by in the speaker's booth from 12 to 12:30. So I want to just basically say that up front in case we miss your question. Make sure to go over there to that speaker's booth, and he'll be there right after this time frame from 12 to 12:30. So jot that down. So with that, David, como te dije, there's a lot of good questions. I'm going to ask the question, and then if you can be so kind as to give us the quick, so we can get through some other questions.
I will.
All right. So one of them, and the very first one, is leaders today have the fortune of D&I being at the forefront. What was it like for you leading during a time when it wasn't?
I'd say it's a great question. For myself, I ended up making sure that I always represented who I am, right? But I know that in those times, many people were somewhat, if you want to call it, either reluctant, maybe even sometimes embarrassed or ashamed. So I always made it that be your authentic self. And I know it's easy to say and it's a tagline, but I truly can tell you, for those of you that know me, I've always been like that. And I'm proud of where I came from, and I'm proud of who I am.
All right. Can you share any of your favorite failures, along the way, and what you learned from those experiences?
Yeah, failure is part of growing, right? And I think that becomes part of the strength of being a leader, right? And unleashing what you is the key is you've got to fail, right? Nobody's perfect in life, but then resilience is more important. So I can tell you there was, some things that we did, along the border that we didn't quite understand in terms of customs clearance. And it created us big headaches. And for those of you that work internationally, you know how tough customs can be. And we had to really start all over, right? And re-implement. So that's just one quick tidbit. Another one is, I can tell you, I won't call it a failure, but maybe poor judgment. There's been some, selections that I made along the way of people that I thought were, X person, and they ended up turning out being Y, and had to address those, right? And I guess I call that a little bit of failure. I thought I was a pretty good judge of character in that, but sometimes you can't know everything about everyone, especially when you're managing 15, 20,000 folks.
Yeah. Was there ever a time you said no to a relocation role, or maybe just a role in general? And if not, flexibility to move enabled you because of that?
The answer is no. I never turned down an opportunity. Once I decided that I was going to move on, I made my commitment. And whether it was, a place that I really didn't want to go to for whatever the reason, at that point I said, listen, I committed to the organization that I would do that. Now, there was conversations later on in life that said, listen, unless this is going to be good for the organization myself, I think I relocated 7, 8, or 9 times. I lost count. I kind of like to plant some roots somewhere, and so will my family. So maybe not say no, but then you communicate that, how do we maybe manage this a bit there? Because you could tell I move quite a bit pretty often, right?
Yeah, there's another good question, David, as I'm going through all the great questions here. I'm kind of picking some that you haven't actually talked about yet.
Okay.
Add some more nuggets. This one is, how would you recommend someone to identify sponsors that will, put your name in the hat when those opportunities come up?
I think that's a great question. You heard me talk about relationships, and you heard me early on that my immediate supervisor and I had built a good relationship. So relationships, you have to extend yourself from your circle of influence, right? So through venues like this, right, I said, where you get an opportunity to meet not only other colleagues or other individuals that are navigating the same waters, you end up getting an opportunity to meet some leaders, and it opens doors. And then I think you have to seek them out. If there's somebody within your organization that you seem to hold in high regard, introduce yourself to them, let them know who you are, and try to foster a relationship, and tell them that, you're looking for some coaching, counseling, and mentoring, and would love to have an opportunity to speak with them. You've got to be assertive, take those steps.
Following up a little bit on that one, David, here's another question. It says, how did you go about taking on different roles that were maybe outside of your skill set?
Hey, listen, there was a lot of learning, right? So like most folks, I was a little nervous, a little apprehensive, right? Because I didn't have past experience in maybe some of those different operations that I went into. But, I think it's one of those self-education. So I had to do a lot of internal, like studying myself, and also external education, right? Areas that I didn't understand, I had to make sure that I got the training. And if it wasn't afforded me, I had to go seek it there, right? So I didn't just say, whoa, me, and to put me in a place. I said, okay, I've got some areas I need to shore up. How can I do that with the assistance of the company or either some outside training?
So again, I'm looking to follow up on that a little bit more of the kind of a zooming out, maybe a little bit, David, is what do you think are some of the most common things holding us back as Latinx or Latinos, Hispanic professionals, and anything you would share to overcome that?
Boy, oh boy, oh boy. I could tell you things have been changing, right? So I think we're a more what I can call if you want to say unified community, right? But for a while we weren't, right? So sometimes, we wouldn't support each other. And there may be times that people still do that, right? Because there's either insecurity, there's jealousy. So I think that we've got to be willing to go ahead and share our time, talent, and even treasure sometimes with others, right? We end up getting, hey, I got mine, and you know what? The rest of you, hey, you got to fight like I did. I'm not a believer in that. I'm a believer that we should share the lessons learned. And if we can help enable others, right, and open doors, we should be, right? So we can't be jealous. We can't be self-centered, right? And then at some point, as you grow in that, you can't forget where you come from. And I know that sounds cliche-ish, right? But, don't turn into that person that you don't want to be, right? Maybe somebody arrogant and all of a sudden you say, we've all heard it in Spanish, oye, él que se cree, oye, que se cree, that type of thing, right? If anything, I think venues like this and fostering relationships and being willing to lend a helping hand, I think we'll continue to grow as a community.
So we're going to be wrapping up in about 3 or so minutes, and so I have a couple more questions here. One of them is, what was one of your proudest moments during your career path, and how did you correlate to your personal life?
Well, I think that's great. Obviously, when I got the opportunity to be president of Mexico, it's probably the highlight, right? because it was a country that my parents left looking for opportunity, and nobody wants to leave their family, right? And I had the opportunity to go back to a place that my parents ended up leaving, and I went back there creating opportunity, right? And you know, it was a proud moment for myself, and obviously I think for my parents as well.
Thank you. The next one here is, have you ever doubted yourself when some of these opportunities were presented to you, or left or felt reports or colleagues doubted your capabilities, kind of just around some self-doubt?
Yeah. You know, I don't know that I would say I doubted myself, right? I'm a believer that I can, you know, learn like the best of anybody, but I can't tell you that I was extremely nervous. I mean, nervous as nervous can be, even though people said you never get nervous. And I always tell people it's good to be nervous. I said, the only thing is, you heard the term butterflies in your stomach. I had plenty of those. The only thing I share with people is make sure that your butterflies are organized. When they're in formation and they're organized,
That's a good one.
You do things pretty well there. But yeah, I was nervous a lot of times, but never doubted.
We have several questions about kind of your continued learning. Like, do you have recommendations for books, for certain leaders to follow, anything along those lines for continuing personal development?
Yeah, so I tell you, when you shore up your skills, so as I started growing and saw that I had an opportunity to go to general management, I had to get some additional training, right? So one, I've got some internal training that I asked for in terms of finance, right? Truly understanding, you know, profit and loss, especially if I was going to be responsible for it. I needed to understand it. You know, my role also afforded me a lot of, you know, in front of the cameras and speaking. So I took some, you know, speaking courses, as well as was trained for media training and things of that nature. So there's trainings that you can do that will go ahead and improve your skill sets there, right? And in terms of books, right? I mean, there's plenty of leadership books out there by tons of people. And, you know, I think they're all valuable. Sometimes they may be repetitive, but they at least kind of point you in the right direction. That here's some areas you should focus in on.
All right. Well, I'm going to start wrapping this up here, David. Before we do a final, any last, you know, if you had one phrase, one like raw for everyone, what would that be?
You know, I would just say, you know, keep believing in yourself, keep fighting the fight. Right, and they're on multiple fronts, right? Whether they're internal struggles or corporate struggles there. And then I wish you all continued success, right? I'm very proud of all of our community and the inroads we made and the success and what we continue to do. And I think it's only going to get better.
Well, muchísimas gracias, David. Thank you so much, dear. Greatly appreciate you being here. I think you've made a lot of new friends that you will find on LinkedIn. Hopefully everyone has a chance to connect with you. And again, as I mentioned, you know, apologies that we weren't able to get to all of the questions, but at least you got a chance to hear from David personally. And so you can follow up with him at the speaker's booth. Again, it's from 12 to 12:30 today. And we will be joining, he will be joining us during the structured networking break, also at 1 o'clock. Thank you again to JP Morgan Chase and UPS for sponsoring the ASED Leadership Pipeline Program. Up next is Being Authentic on Your Climb to the C-Suite, and that's going to be beginning at noon. Again, muchísimas gracias, mucho gusto. Much love, David, y un abrazo y besos a todos. Gracias.
Igualmente, cuídate mucho.